In the meantime, the Republican Conference of Tshwane is a new political formation that has brought together independent candidates contesting local government elections in the nation's capital. So each candidate is responsible for their own campaign and ward-specific manifestos. Successful candidates pledge to only vote on policies and budgets that directly impact their communities. The party says its approach will ensure greater accountability and empower communities to recall those who failed them. So Lex Middelberg is the party's mayoral candidate for Tshwane. He joins us now via our video link. Lex, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning on the AM Report. And certainly from what I've just outlined about how you are doing things, your strategy is a lot more complex than just an independent candidate.
Yes, indeed it is. It's derived from the constitutions of various political parties in all the grand democracies of the world. What we set out to do was to investigate what the problem was in South Africa or in Tshwane with regard to how people are being represented, because there is a disconnect between public representatives of the parties and the people on the ground.
Yeah.
What you find is that public representatives of the various parties are the employees of those parties. They apply for a job as a councillor with the party. They go through interview processes. They fall under disciplinary procedures of the parties. They do what the parties expect them to do, and they represent the parties in the community. And that is not democracy. Democracy is where people send their public representatives to their deliberative legislative assemblies, and these people represent their communities in the first place and vote for the issues of their communities and answer to the issues of their communities, and they come back and they give accountability to their communities on what they have done. We started off after the 2016 elections. I used to be a councillor back then from 11 to 16, and I resigned in October 2016. And we started a civic movement which we called the Tshwane Money Matters Caucus to deepen the knowledge outside of council amongst the public of processes that takes place, and to participate meaningfully in public participation processes. Because one of my experiences back then was that the public has no clue of what's happening in council. They don't understand budget processing.
Yeah.
They don't understand what they can do, what comments they can do, what they can insist on, and often they give comments, and those comments don't even get answered. It gets a brief mention in the reports in council, and then the voting takes place. And from there, we were approached by a lot of people in the communities who asked us for help with their billing problems and with their liaising with council problems and things like that. And the question then arose when we asked people, who said, but do you realize you voted for this problem? This problem is there because you voted for it. And at that stage, we started investigating how to do it differently. And as I say, we looked at the constitutions of political parties the world over, from America to Australia to the United Kingdom. And we found that South Africa stands alone virtually amongst the democratic countries with the kind of political parties that we have that exert this command and control over their councillors. In all the other democracies, people represent their people, and the party actually negotiate and confers with their public representatives to present a unified front. But the party itself, you can go through the constitutions of all the big parties. There's nothing about disciplinary procedures there. There's nothing about command and control structures by which they get a unified response to the councils and so on. And that is where the idea originated. And we actually took some of these constitutions, based it on that, took the best from various countries and put it in our constitution, adopted for local conditions. So we are...
Lex, can I come in there for just a second and ask you this, because it's such an important thing that you're pointing out here, that these candidates are accountable to the communities that they live in. The local government elections are important for a number of reasons, but specifically because they are about those bread and butter issues. Service delivery where I live, whether my refuse is removed, whether the grass is cut, whether there are potholes in the roads that I drive on the way to school, all of these bread and butter issues, and yet you still find candidates in big political parties that don't actually live in the communities that they are standing in.
Yes, that is one of your major problems, is you apply for a job with a political party.
Yeah.
And if they like you and you pass all their tests and all their interviews, then they're going to place you. And very often they place you very far away from where you live. With us, the community where you want to stand is where you apply for your job.
Yeah.
You're unlikely to get that job or that appointment as a candidate for the election if you don't have a network in that community. So in that way, we automatically take care of that issue. It is possible, of course, that somebody from outside can apply and will be successful, but it's unlikely.
Yeah, yeah. So insofar as how your campaign is being run, candidates decide on their own posters, they decide on their own election manifestos and the issues that they will be running on. It's informed by the community that they, again, are standing in.
Yes. You will see where there are posters. Obviously, with this system, you have better and worse quality campaigns being run, depending on the abilities of the candidates and the financial abilities that they get from the community. But you will see mostly these posters are informed by local issues. We have posters up about the agricultural rates issue, where agricultural properties are being recategorized as residential and the rates are up by 400% in an instant. You have posters about the billing issues. You have posters about estimations being the basis of accounts and things like that. We don't control that because we say it's very much like you find in America, where you stand, you apply to your community, you become the candidate if you've run through primaries, but after that you run your own campaign. You're responsible for what you say. You're responsible for putting out your material. You are responsible for building and developing your networks. You are responsible for getting elected, and it's between you and your community. We give support, we give direction. We have developed some basic materials on which, for instance, the posters have a common look and feel, but the candidates are entitled to put their own wording on there, depending on their own community. So there is some support from our side, but we don't direct, we don't command, we don't instruct, we don't rule.
So this is the question leading into these local government elections in terms of how people will cast their votes. I mean, you've said in the pre-interview we had with you before coming on air that you don't have a lot of money to do your own surveys and such about the sentiment on the ground. But the issue here about people changing their votes from some of the bigger political parties and actually this time around giving independent candidates an opportunity where service delivery has failed before. How do you reckon you will do, based on, analysts saying that people are unlikely in many respects, even if service delivery has failed, to change their votes from the big political parties?
Okay. There's two ways to answer that question. First of all, we didn't walk into this blindly. We didn't make a lot of fuss in the last year or two, but we did exist. We did develop the concept, and we worked with activists or volunteers on the ground, and we actually ran a campaign based on our principles. For instance, in Ward 3 of Tshwane during May of this year, where we had a very good candidate, was well networked in a community, well liked in a community, has been doing a lot of social activism work in the community. She stood as an independent, not even with our logos or with our name associated with her, but her campaign was conducted entirely on the basis on which we do it now. She got 22% of the vote in that ward. She outperformed all the big parties in 2 of the 5 PDs. She got most votes there. She equaled the parties in a third VD, and she only did badly in 2 other VDs, which then eventually gave the result to the DA with a majority of 3 votes. So there is scope for that. You can also look at the latest Ipsos polls, and you will see that the number of people who are not committed to vote for one of the big parties, it's the biggest number that I have ever seen in pre-election surveys. It stands at about 8% at this stage. That is huge, 2.5 weeks before an election. We find on the ground, as we liaise with the various candidates, that the reception is good. Remember, one of the reasons why we formed this as a party is that if these people stood independently, all of them, it's unlikely that many of them would be elected. It is possible, but history has shown it doesn't happen.
Lex Middelberg, yeah, I definitely think that the point has been made, and unfortunately we have to cut in there, and thank you for your time this morning, and all the best in the run-up to these local government elections. It certainly is an interesting one, especially given the numbers that you've just told us about. Lex Middelberg is Republican Conference of Tshwane mayoral candidate, new political formation bringing together independent candidates contesting the local government elections in the nation's capital. Thanks very much indeed.